my goal today is to help you get ready. It's for you to feel ready, for you to feel more confident in guiding your youth through grief and loss. And so we made an acrostic for you so it'll be easy to remember. And it's the idea of I'm ready to share. So we're going to talk about sharing today. And there's 3 important things I want you to learn how to share. And the first one's information. There's information related to death loss. For instance, we're going to talk a lot about death loss today, but a lot of things we'll talk about will also apply to other losses. So there's information that needs to be shared. There's a model that needs to be shared. Our youth need a model for grieving. It isn't enough for us to just share information with them. They need to see someone else working through their grief. And then we're going to talk about the idea of ritual or rituals that may be helpful in the process of grieving. So those are the 3 things I want to share with you today. So the first one is I'm ready to share information. And in 2 Samuel, we have this interesting story of King David. If you can recall having read through the Old Testament or had your pastor preaching about this, anybody remember what they did when the child died?
Well, they didn't want to tell him.
They didn't want to tell him. They didn't want to tell David. I don't know if you remember why. There's a couple of hints in there as to why.
It felt like he was very, very sad. It would be devastating for him.
He's going to be very, very sad.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So it says that they had fear, and it says that they didn't think he was going to take it well, right? Their fear was that he wasn't going to take it well. And I think that's how we feel a lot of times around death, or if someone's sick or something like that. We fear to say anything to our youth. Why? Because we think they're not going to take it well, right? But what they had done for David is they had made up in their minds how David was going to react to it. And it turns out when they told David, he was okay with it because he had spent so much time in angst about his own sin and all these things beforehand. So when this happened, he actually did okay. So we see that they tried to keep this information from David. That sound familiar in your family growing up? Maybe things were hid from you because they didn't think that you could take it, or maybe you've done that with your youth. But the thing is, David knew what was going on. So when they came and told him, he actually knew. Because the thing is, most of us are pretty perceptive. We read body language, even if we don't know exactly what's going on. We know something's off. And I think youth are particularly perceptive. We think we're like hiding things from them, but they often know something weird's going on, right? And so most of us know that the Bible condemns lying. What I want you to know is also, I think the Bible also condemns closed communication, of which lying is a part. And closed communication is when we create a system where we close down communication. So anything that inhibits that, I think, is also, God looks at that as problematic because he wants us to be open. He wants us to be honest about these things. In Proverbs 16 through 19, the Bible lists 7 things that the Lord detests, and I was surprised to see that 3 of them relate to lying. A lying tongue, a false witness that pours out lies, and also a person who sows discord among the brethren. And how many times in the aftermath of loss is somebody sowing discord about finances or something, right? That happens often. But all 3 of these things are creating a system that isn't open, isn't vulnerable, isn't healthy for the people who are grieving. So God would have us be open and honest about death in general, but I think also about the details of death or the details of the particular loss that we are in the middle of. Now, why is information so important for young people? The reason that information is important for young people is because especially younger kids have magical thinking, right? So when I was a kid, I was 10 years old. My mother died, my stepfather died. They died violent deaths. And do you know what I thought? I thought it was my fault. I didn't get very good information about what actually happened. So I was like, it must be my fault. I was a bad kid. Like I got a bad grade over there. My father had to discipline me. My stepfather had to discipline me. It's my fault. And so in the absence of good information, sometimes our kids will come to their own conclusions about what has happened, and sometimes they'll end up with self-blame and self-hate about that. So that's why it's important for them to get some information about what's happening. In Proverbs 12 and verse 19, it warns us that the truth will stand the test of time. Don't worry about the truth. The truth can handle itself, right? But the scripture also says lies are soon exposed. How many of you found out information about stuff in your family in your 20s and 30s and 40s, maybe 50s and 60s, right? You found out stuff, it was like, that would have been nice to know back there. Like, why didn't anybody tell me that? And the thing is, our kids are going to likely find out information that we're right now withholding from them. And what do you think the process is going to be? They're probably going to have lost trust with us. They're probably going to have feelings of betrayal, like, why didn't you tell me? In Proverbs 24 and 26, it proclaims it is an honor to receive an honest reply. So we want to be honorable with our youth. We want to give them an honest reply. What are some of the questions that we might be asked about death that need an honest reply? What questions have you been asked about death or grief or loss from some of the youth that you have encountered?
How did it happen?
How did it happen?
What happens after death?
What happens after death? Yeah. Another one is, am I going to die? Right? The youth want to know, it's like something bad going to happen to me. All right, so these are some of the questions that we have that deserve an honest answer. In Proverbs 3 and verse 27, it advises us, do not withhold good. If you have good and you withhold it from someone who deserves it when it's in the power for you to help them, it says, don't say to your neighbor, come back later and I'll give it to you tomorrow, when you have it with you today. So if we have good that we can give our youth and we don't give it to them, the Bible says that's not a good thing. So what information would be good for our youth to know, right? Because it's talking about if you can do good, do it. What would be good information? Well, it is important for us to talk about the person died. Let's just be honest about it. We also need to be honest, the person's not coming back. And we can say this is sad. This was not God's will. If we go back to Genesis, we see God had a different plan for us, and we chose death and destruction through Adam and Eve. We can say we wish this would have been different. We wish our loved one wouldn't have gotten sick or wouldn't have died. We can say that the child that we're working with or the youth are able to ask us any questions that we might not have all the answers, but they can ask us anything that they want. And I think we should also let them know that God will walk with them through the valley of the shadow of death here, that God is going to be with them. God is going to help them. God is going to sustain them. And then, depending on the details of the loved one's death, there may be other details that would be pertinent for the child to know. For instance, if there's some disease, and it's a genetic disease, at some point it's going to be important for that young person to know that. But here's the thing. As we're sharing information, we want to share information based on the child's maturity level, right? I'm not going to tell a 5-year-old your uncle had a genetic disease and this is going to impact you or something like that, right? That a preschooler isn't going to be able to grasp that. So let's take Uncle Tom's suicide as an example of how we could share with youth. If there's a preschooler or a kindergartner, I might say Uncle Tom died. Or I might say his body stopped working, because they might not even understand death. His body stopped working, and it's very sad, right? We might start there. With the preschool or kindergarten, we might get a book, that we could read about death and loss. That might also be helpful. If the child's 7 to 10, then we can share a little bit more, right? We can say Uncle Tom had an illness. It's called depression, and he had this for many years, and he died from this illness. But we wished it would have been different. We wish he would have been able to get more help. We might say something like that to an older child. Now, when we get up around 11 to 14, we can maybe share even more, right? But probably at that age, I know I have a 10-year-old and her brain's firing like faster than mine can fire. I might ask her some questions, right? So what do you know about what happened? What have you heard? And what do you believe about this? What do you understand about this? And then I can correct any misinformation that the child might have. But then I might say, Uncle Tom took his own life because he didn't want to live anymore. If you want to know more, then you can ask me. You could ask me anything about that, right? So these are some of the kinds of things that we can say. Now our kids are getting older. Maybe they're 15 or up into college. They might want to know more details. And they might want to know some things that you're not comfortable talking about. So you can be honest. There's some things I'm not ready to talk about yet, about this. But remember that your role is to guide the youth into adulthood. So 15 into college, we have to be careful we're not snow plowing. I don't know if you've heard of that term. Snow plowing is where parents or grandparents go ahead of the child and they remove any obstacles so the child doesn't have to encounter any conflict or any problems in life, right? Sometimes we try to do that. There's the helicopter parenting thing as well. We're like helicoptering over them, like making sure nothing happens to them 24/7. So we want to be careful because our job at this point, 15 to 22, is we're getting ready to launch them, right? So we want to be careful we're not overprotecting them at that point. What do kids want to know? Well, I think every kid is different, every youth is different. So invite them to ask you questions because you may not know what might be the important thing for them. You don't want to share information that they're not interested in. You don't want to share information that they're not ready for. And so letting them ask questions is a good way to handle it. There's some tips that I like to give. Let's depend on God and God's grace, not our own earthly wisdom. I might have some ideas about how to handle this, but God knows best. God knows my youth best and knows what they need, so I can depend on Him. We're going to ask the Spirit of truth, the Spirit of God, for wisdom and how to deal with this and what to share. I think it's really important to share the hope of the gospel. Grief is a very difficult thing. If we leave the gospel off to the side, that can be really tough. So let's also share the hope of the gospel for ourselves, but also for the other people around us. Like often what we'll pray with our children around death and grief and loss is that the people who are being affected by grief and loss will come to Christ, will know Him through this. And it's an opportunity to be evangelistic with our children and show them the gospel. Also, Proverbs tells us that there is a word that's fitly spoken, right? There's a word, and when we say that word at that time, that can be a really good thing, a word fitly spoken. So one of the things you can consider when talking about topics like this, or really any difficult topics, even like thinking like sex or adoption or some other sensitive issues, is to use a scoop method. And the scoop method is like, don't back up the dump truck and dump everything on the youth, right? Use a scoop. Here, let me share this with you and see how they react to that, right? Then you can scoop some more and you can keep scooping. Maybe eventually you get the whole dump truck out and they'll get it all. But start somewhere, start small, and maybe that'll help you because sometimes we're uncomfortable having some of these conversations. Start small and build up. And that way you can absorb whether or not the youth is absorbing what you're saying. Another thing I want you to know is you're not alone. We have clergy, we have counselors, we have trusted family members, and those people can be a resource for you. If you don't know what to say in some of these moments, you can ask around. Ask some of those people who are godly or some of those people who have wisdom about some of these things. But also, we don't want to forget that our youth also should have adults in their lives. I think one of the goals that we have had for our 3 girls in our home is that they could have at least 5 adults, that they know that adult's name and they know they could pick up the phone or text that adult and say anything to that adult. Have at least 5 of those kinds of people in each of our girls' lives. That way, they're not completely dependent on just mom and dad. They know that there's a whole church or a whole group behind them. So all this at least should help prepare us to be a little bit more confident about the information that we would share regarding death or loss.